We're going to hear now from David Ansermino, who has also been a very long time ChainSafe employee and has been working with us since the very early days. He is going to speak to us today in regards to Filecoin retrieval markets. Take it away, David.
Awesome. So my name is David Ansermino. I work at ChainSafe Systems. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about Filecoin retrieval markets and a project that we worked on specifically to utilize gossiping to enable secondary retrieval markets. So presently, the Filecoin architecture gives you something like this. Any user can select a given miner and initiate a storage deal with them, so that user can store the files with that miner. The user can also do retrieval deals, and so they can ask the miner for the data and get it back. In this picture here, the user is dealing with one specific miner, and so that obviously kind of limits the availability of the data and provides sufficient retrieval access, but there's definitely things here that could kind of be improved a bit. It's important to note that these miners are participating in the consensus algorithm. In Filecoin, we're particularly looking at proof of storage. There's kind of two pieces to the algorithm that they use. The first is proof of replication. And so those miners are taking that data and actually encoding it to create a unique copy of it. And then over time, they participate in proof of space-time, which is when they are asked to randomly supply pieces of that data. And this allows proofs that they are actually storing that data over a period. And so with this in mind, the data that the miners are actually storing is what we call sealed. And so that's the encoded data. And one of the limitations with this is that to actually provide the original data, that sealed data has to be unsealed or decoded. And this is a computationally expensive process. And there's definitely a lot of improvements coming down the pipeline quite quickly in terms of the sealing process and efficiency there. But generally, this kind of provides a limitation for how rapidly the storage miners can provide retrieval. There is one very simple solution that is available, which is simply to have the miners store a copy of the data that is unsealed. And this obviously has some cost benefits to consider. I apologize for this diagram being very small, but this is the entire retrieval deal flow from when a user attempts to retrieve a piece of data from a miner to when they actually get that back. And I just want to kind of highlight this one portion of it here, which is the data transfer protocol, which is quite interesting. Effectively, the client will receive a small portion of that data and then provide a payment voucher through a payment channel that allows the miner to then be paid for providing that retrieval. And so this is obviously a lot more complex in implementation, but it provides a basic data transfer protocol that could quite easily be applied to different contexts. The only on-chain component here is really the payment channel that gets used. And it's definitely possible to, kind of integrate this with possibly other payment channels that exist, maybe beyond just the Filecoin network. So this is a very interesting component of kind of the existing mechanisms that are provided in the core protocol, and definitely provides opportunities to be used in other areas as well. So zooming out a bit, this is kind of what we see with the network. We have the miners that make up the Filecoin network, and then clients kind of coming to these miners and doing storage and retrieval deals with them. When we start to look at secondary markets, we're picturing something a bit more like this, where there's perhaps an intermediary or a third party that is able to fulfill clients' requests for data. So these providers would be making this data available, possibly by retrieving it off the Filecoin network or perhaps through some other means. And then given the data transfer protocol that exists, they can leverage this to gather incentivization and kind of engage in a very similar exchange process. And then, yeah, this is obviously kind of external to the core Filecoin network. Some of the benefits of this are that it reduces the reliance on storage miners. Storage miners can focus on the computationally expensive process of doing the sealing process and effectively storing data. It also lowers the storage requirements for those who are attempting to provide data. So perhaps instead of having access to a lot of storage, you have a really fast connection. And so you can kind of opt to optimize your setup for retrieval just based on what benefits you have available to you. In doing this, we also improve the availability of the data on the network. There's more entry points for users to come in and potentially retrieve the data that they're looking for. We would see a lot more replication and that sort of thing. One of the reasons to design things this way is definitely to avoid adding further complexity to the core protocol. The proof of storage is definitely, a rather innovative protocol in its design, and is definitely pushing many of the limits of, the cryptography and other components that we have available to us. And so by moving this out of the core protocol, we kind of allowed that to be focused on, and we can perhaps implement multiple different solutions to adapt to different use cases to really help grow the use of the network. One other interesting point here is that this data that's being provided most certainly doesn't need to come from Filecoin. It's certainly conceivable that providers can provide data that anybody's willing to pay for effectively, whether or not that's being actively stored on Filecoin. The common example I like to use is, classical literature. If perhaps, you have 100 books that, are well known and are constantly in demand, you can make those available and be paid just for the retrieval service, not for the actual content yourself. Looking at some of the key requirements to really build a system like this, some of these we have, some are work in progress. Content addressing is definitely a very important one here, kind of a fundamental component of Filecoin and IPFS. And in this context, it's particularly useful for ensuring the integrity of the data. So, if you have a third party that's providing you data, you can ensure that the data that you're getting is the data that you're requesting. And that's a very simple thing to do. It also gives us global addressing. And so we can address exactly the content that we want in any context. There shouldn't be any conflicting addresses or anything like that. The data exchange protocol, which I mentioned earlier, this allows for payments to the retrieval provider for providing that data, and it also protects both parties. So both if the provider is acting maliciously and perhaps stops sending all the files, there is a penalty for that. And similarly, if the client doesn't receive all the data, then they won't be necessarily required to pay the full price. Some of the things that are still being worked on, discovery mechanisms. So if you're looking for a piece of data, how do you find the best retrieval provider? Certainly the definition of best could vary depending on what context you're in and what needs you might have. And so we certainly see a number of potential solutions coming out for this. And another big unknown is kind of how you optimize storage for retrieval. So, in order to provide a file, you certainly need to have that data available. And given that there's incentives to provide storage on the Filecoin network, you need to then kind of rationalize the cost of the storage space that you're using specifically for retrieval. And kind of to get into this a bit further, we also need to consider what is perhaps the most profitable. How do you look at the network and kind of decide what people are requesting and what you might pay to retrieve in order to make it available so you can participate in that. So definitely a lot of interesting potentials there. The project that we worked on had a couple goals. Really the main one was to discover a mechanism, to create a novel discovery mechanism for finding data, specifically using gossip sub through libp2p. And so we want to be able to allow clients to gossip a message and effectively retrieve or receive responses from retrieval providers who can provide them the data that they're looking for. We also want to start to inform the retrieval providers of what is being requested, so what's popular and what might be profitable, and start to kind of explore some of the potential avenues for optimizing this. And another big piece of this is really allowing miners to be exclusively retrieval providers. So as you saw on the first slide, the kind of core protocol has the miner being responsible for both storage and retrieval. And so this is really focusing on taking out the retrieval portion and allowing that to kind of exist in isolation. So to give you a bit more of a clear picture of how this works, let's say we have a client who wants a piece of data, and here we have several providers on the network. And so the client can go ahead and submit their query to the gossip sub network, typically through some bootstrap nodes. And then those nodes can gossip the request to the other provider, and all the providers who have the data available can then respond to the client with an offer. And then the client is able to use that data exchange protocol to actually retrieve the data and pay for that retrieval from that provider using the parameters that were specified in the offer. Just to get a little more technical and look a bit more concretely at these components. So the client is simply submitting requests for data to the network. They then keep themselves open to receive responses directly from providers, and are then it's up to them to kind of decide which offer is the best, which you may be willing to pay a lower cost for a slower connection or something like that. And so they can kind of choose freely which one they want to engage on. The provider is really just responsible for listening to requests from clients. They will receive a CID, which specifies the data that the client is looking for, and then they'll go and look in their data store and see if they have it available. If they do, they can respond directly to the client with the parameters that would be required to initiate the retrieval, so things like pricing. As I mentioned, one of the big questions here is how you optimize for profitability or potentially availability. More precisely, how do providers decide what data is worth providing? One of the big considerations here is if you're making data available from the Filecoin network, you're going to have to retrieve that data yourself. And so you perhaps need to factor in the cost of that initial retrieval versus the potential profit that you can get from it. Alternatively, you could use other methods to obtain data. There's, as I mentioned, nothing necessarily that ties all this directly to the Filecoin network in terms of the data that's being provided. Furthermore, we could perhaps develop a network of providers that are exchanging data that's available on Filecoin to kind of populate their own data stores, very similar to how IPFS functions. A big consideration here is the change in profitability due to pricing and popularity adjustments. So the cost for retrieval on the network is definitely variable and can kind of be impacted by any number of factors. For example, if a couple nodes go offline, the price for retrieval could be pushed up. Similarly, if more nodes come online, the pricing for retrieval could go down. And also popularity. So, one piece of data might be valuable today, but completely worthless tomorrow. And so these definitely need to be taken into consideration. And we need to start developing some kind of novel ways of approaching these problems. One big thing to note here is that the locality of a provider can affect its desirability. In a decentralized network, like, for example, a gossip subnetwork like we have here, depending on which node on the network you look from, you're going to get a very different perspective. And so if a node, depending on where a node is in the network, it can certainly affect, even if something is popular, whether or not that node is the correct one to be serving it. And so you can't necessarily make general assumptions about various pieces of the network. You very much need to focus on your particular perspective. To start kind of playing around with these ideas and give a little more insight into what's really going on, we included some basic mechanisms to provide some metrics and insights. So there's an LFU cache inside of the providers, which is tracking the n most frequent requests. So this could easily be taken and kind of used to decide which files to retrieve from Filecoin, perhaps take a subset of these that are the least expensive to retrieve, and then make those available. And so there's definitely a few things that could be done with this data. And then the software also provides a subscription mechanism so that an external service could actually subscribe to all the requests that are happening on the network. This obviously provides further extensibility. And again, it could be a similar idea where if something is deemed worthy of being retrieved, it could then go and be retrieved. Similarly, this might be interacting with perhaps a network of providers who are kind of exchanging data between each other to make it more available. So the implementation lives here under ChainSafe/Phil secondary retrieval markets. Please go check it out. Right now, it is more or less fully functional. The kind of component that we're still trying to nail down is just integrating the data transfer protocol. As I mentioned, one of our main goals here is to really separate it from the storage miner. And the present implementation makes some assumptions that it's being used within the context of a storage miner. And so we're hoping to isolate that a bit further and then directly integrate these components to give a seamless experience. So yeah, I do have a small demo, which I'll do just now. But yeah, I definitely want to reiterate that we're hiring. We work on lots of cool, exciting, emerging technologies like this. And so definitely, if it piques your interest, come chat with us. Definitely, if you have any questions about what I've been speaking about, please reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff. So definitely, yeah. I'm going to try to switch over to this. So here I have 4 terminals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 3 retrieval providers and 1 retrieval client and attempt to request data from these retrieval providers. This is all using gossip sub, so we need to first establish a retrieval provider, which we'll use as a boot node. So I can go ahead and take its listening address here, and I can pass it into the other 2 providers. And so those should be all connected now. And then the way that I've configured this is that this retrieval provider does not have any data available, and these 2 do have a particular CID available. And so I'm going to go to the client here and go ahead and specify the boot node address again, and then go ahead and request the CID that I loaded into both of these. And so as you can see, both of these received the query, and we got 2 responses here, each with specific parameters for what the cost of retrieval is. And so now the client can go ahead and actually utilize the data transfer protocol to perform that exchange. So yeah, that's all I have to share. Thanks so much for listening. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Really exciting to see Filecoin in action too. So thanks for sharing that demo. So we're just going to take a quick moment just to answer some questions from the audience. First one being, how important do you think secondary retrieval markets will become within the Filecoin system?
I would say that they're fairly critical to the adoption of Filecoin. Definitely, you know, if we look at the existing internet infrastructure, the speed at which you can retrieve something is definitely a very important variable when it comes to providing internet-based services. And so we have a lot of like last mile endpoints that make data available very close to consumers. And so if we want Filecoin to kind of keep up with systems like this, we definitely need to develop a number of solutions that can address a variety of use cases, whether it's this kind of you know, last mile serving of data, or even just quick retrieval or perhaps free retrieval. And so, yeah, definitely as it exists, Filecoin has the functionality to both do storage and retrieval, but really to gain the adoption that we're looking for, it's definitely going to be critical to build out several solutions for this.
Definitely still in its early days for sure. So second now, how do you distinguish between primary retrieval markets and secondary? Because even primary retrieval markets make the use of payment channels.
Totally. Really, we're looking at the participants. So in the primary market, you have to be a storage provider or storage miner. And so that's kind of the primary market. Is the storage deals are somewhat conflated with the retrieval deals. And so the secondary market goes outside of that core protocol, and that's certainly one distinguishing aspect, is that it's external to the core protocol, but really it's just breaking out that retrieval piece so that it can be further utilized.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So finally, is there a benefit of being a retrieval provider if no one within the retrieval provider's locale is requesting data? For example, if I'm in the Arctic and no one is requesting data in that region.
Yeah, that definitely could pose a problem. Definitely, like, it does appear that even people with perhaps not the fastest connection could still be desirable if they're in, you know, a location such as the Arctic. But definitely, it's a huge consideration. And I mean, even just being in perhaps South America or Africa, these are definitely continents where we're seeing less rapid adoption, less availability of data. You definitely need to really try to get an idea of whether or not there is a potential market fit for you. But certainly, I imagine that everywhere in the world, there is a potential use case, and it's really just a matter on honing in on what should be provided.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, David.